Back to the Future, the musical. If you guys know anything about me, I am a huge Back to the Future fan. I've spoken about the movie multiple times. I've highlighted how the screenplay for Back to the Future 1 is considered a perfect screenplay, and I think it's taught in theater classes. It's my personal favorite trilogy of any genre, any movies, all time. And I've also said, controversial to some, that it's one of the rare occasions where the sequel, Back to the Future 2, is even better than the first movie. And I know that's blasphemous for some folks to hear. And even I myself go back and forth between that thought from time to time. But just from the creativity of it alone, to delve back into the first movie through the second movie and find ways to tie into the first movie and make things that already existed within the first movie, make them that way because of the actions of the second movie, which was filmed and created, I think it was something like 5 years later. It's just fucking amazing from that standpoint. And I'm such a fan that my debut novel, FRACTAL, available now, spuntoday.com/books. So you can find all the links of all the different places where you can find it. Back to the Future is an inspiration for that story. It is a time travel tale, as I like to say. Furthermore, I dedicated that book to my firstborn, Aiden. And the quote, the very first quote after the dedication section of the book, is a quote from Back to the Future Part 1 from George McFly to Marty McFly, stating, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish absolutely anything. In him speaking to writing his first novel. So there's a complete tie-in on multiple levels there. I fucking love it. I literally have a life-size replica of the hoverboard immediately to my left right now. That said, I signed up, or like I follow all the different Back to the Future fan pages, official, unofficial, and I saw months before that they were developing the musical. I also subscribed to a bunch of different newsletters having to do with Back to the Future and the DMC newsletter, even from the DeLorean Motor Company. And I signed up to be alerted when the pre-sales went on, and I bought these tickets months in advance. I think something like 7 months in advance. That's how much I was anticipating going. So I copped the tickets, and my wife and I, shout out to Zoila, Spun Today alum, went to go see it and had an amazing time. Being such a fan, holding the musical to a very high bar. I don't want them to fuck it up, while at the same time being completely biased and knowing that I'll find a way to love it some way or another. So holding my love for the story and the history of the film aside, as much as is humanly possible, and attempting to be objective, I personally thought they knocked it out the park. Now, they clearly didn't have, I'm not sure if Back to the Future, if it's old enough, I think it came out in 89, where the story itself is public domain, or if they actually got the rights to retell the story in this format, because I don't believe that Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale were involved with the musical. Could be wrong, but I don't believe they were. And I wonder if certain choices that they made throughout the musical had to do with not having the full rights, or if they had to do with just trying to retell the story on the stage. Because although it was still very, very, very true to the original Back to the Future 1 film, which was another thing that I was curious about, if they were going to try to encapsulate all three films within the musical, but it wasn't. It was just a retelling of the first one. But everything is not, word for word, verbatim, although it does have a lot of the same key scenes. But then certain other key scenes, for example, the famous skateboard scene in front of the diner when Biff and his crew chase Marty and wind up crashing into the manure truck, and Marty's getting around the skateboard. They didn't redo that scene, but in its place, they kind of extend the scene of the lunchroom where Marty first confronts Biff where they both kind of grab each other and make fists and they're about to punch each other, but then Strickland shows up and breaks it up essentially. And Biff tells him, why don't you make like a tree and get out of here? They elongated that scene instead and made that the chase scene and made it so that Biff was chasing Marty throughout the lunchroom. He was jumping over tables and hitting him with lunch trays and running through the school. And they had an original musical number there. So they took certain liberties that way. I guess it was easier to do it that way. If it wasn't a licensing issue or concern, it must have been easier to put that together versus the actual skateboard scene and having multiple cars and etc. But it was something that I was curious about. It was kind of interactive in that, they had the enchantment on the sea dance, and during it, when Marvin Berry and the Starlighters are playing Earth Angel, there were, in the actual theater, there was bubbles. There was a bubble machine or something, and those bubbles going all throughout. So we were in the first few rows, and we could swat the bubbles, and that kind of built the atmosphere around the whole thing. Then of course he did the Johnny B. Good scene. In terms of the cast, all phenomenal. The gentleman who plays Doc killed it. Oh, and that was another thing also. They did not do the Libyan terrorist shooting scene, which I guess to make it more PG, they made it that Doc was using the plutonium for the 1.21 gigawatt reaction that he needs within the flux capacitor to make the time travel possible, but that he was using an old radiation suit which wasn't completely insulated, and that's how he wound up dying initially versus getting shot by the terrorists. But yeah, the gentleman who played Doc, amazing, super funny, steals the show. The guy who plays Marty, spot on, did a great job. But the person who played Crispin Glover's character of George McFly, dead on balls accurate, to quote Marissa Tomei. Fucking amazing, spot on. Like, they could reshoot Back to the Future, drop this gentleman in place of Crispin Glover, who legend has it was like an absolute asshole on set, and that's why he wasn't in part 2 or 3. But drop him into that role and you wouldn't tell the difference. He was amazing, fucking awesome. The guy who played Biff was really good, really looked the part, which brings me to the number one star of the show, the DeLorean. They did it so ill that it looked like an actual real DeLorean that was up there. Like, I guess they just, it's just like the outsides or whatever, but it really looked like an actual replica, real DeLorean. And it's obviously the moment that all the fans are anticipating the most, when they first see the DeLorean, which they did the big reveal in like the same way at Twin Pines Mall, which then becomes Lone Pines Mall at the end when Marty runs over Old Man Peabody's pine tree, symbolizing how the littlest change in the past could have a ripple effect on the future. But they did an amazing job with the car itself, and then with the actual time travel sequence. So the theater, the decor of it, this is how it also immersed the crowd, aside from the bubbles thing from earlier. The decor, the balconies on the sides, on the left and the right, they were also part of the decor. Like, there weren't people sitting in the seats there. Instead, they had this metal widgets and circuitry spanning all of the balconies. And during the time travel sequence, like when Marty accidentally goes back to 1955, all those start lighting up in different colors and it's reminiscent of the flux capacitor and the lights around the actual DeLorean, which they also show, and really immerse you and bring you into it in that way. And then at the end, which was even more amazing because they could have just done that again, they, with like a crane or something you couldn't see, but some sort of lift, they lift up the DeLorean for the scene where, the clock tower scene when he's going back to the future. They lift up the DeLorean and push it forward into the crowd, so it's hovering above us almost, like above the first couple rows. Not completely, but just enough for it to be off of the stage. Could you imagine the fucking lawsuit that thing would have fallen or something? But obviously it was secure, and it was just like so ill the way they did it. And I couldn't have been happier with Back to the Future, the musical. I definitely highly recommend. If I have the chance to see it again, I definitely will. Tickets should be a lot more reasonable now. That's the only issue I had with it, although I was willing to pay, so whatever. But apparently it's not doing well, or as well as anticipated. And the ticket prices, I checked the day of for my same seats, and it was like 40% less in terms of the actual pricing. But that aside, it was an amazing experience. I loved every bit of it. If you're a Back to the Future fan, as I am, you will too. Back to the Future, the musical. Check it out.